Hi, everybody. Welcome. Morning. Everybody full of coffee and other things?
Morning.
You're writers. I know you're all full of it, so that's fine. All right. Well, I want to welcome you all to our March meeting, the day after St. Patrick's Day. I'm Larry Porricelli, president of the Southern California Writers Association. Although, no, I'm not really. I'm Maddie Margarita, vice president, but I feel qualified to step into Larry's shoes because I read that 22 of our previous 45 presidents of the United States are of Irish descent. Do you know that? Half?
42? Half Irish.
22 of about 45.
Half Irish.
Yeah?
Half Irish.
Yeah, so I figure, yeah, I'm qualified. That makes me qualified to step in. So I'm going to try and run a meeting. You know, Larry's kind of loosey-goosey. I'm a little more regimented. So everybody keep quiet, turn your cell phones off, and don't give me any shit. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so we have a great meeting this morning. We have some fun things planned, but we're going to start off by just going around the room and seeing if anybody's got books that are out that are new, that you just briefly, because I don't want to put pressure on anybody, but anytime that you're speaking is time that Antoine Wilson can't speak.
No pressure.
But no pressure. But we do want to hear about your books, and we're excited, or you have news that you want to share. So let's do that first. Anybody want to start? Who wants to start? Where's Renice?
I'm trying to find mine, that's why.
Where's she?
Same cat.
Oh, there you are. Okay, Renice, do you want to stand up? Oh, sure.
Do you want to call it?
Okay.
I don't have her number, but you could call you.
Somebody help Renice back there. That'll be fine.
Here. Call it.
I'll go out here.
No more edibles, Renice.
I'm arrayed. I'm up.
Okay.
Okay, my book is called Dark Stranger, and it's about 4 friends that travel to Bhutan and get involved with a really surrealist group that are trying to find this monk who is killing people for the head monk, who is wants to be the next Dalai Lama and thinks he can do that by killing everybody in his way.
You know, there's something wrong with that. Yeah, on so many levels. I
No, it's fiction.
I love it though. I love it.
It's fiction. And so they come across bodies, they travel through tunnels, they encounter various things like snakes in the tunnel and
Snakes, not snakes. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, it's an Indiana Jones reference.
It's not snakes on a plane, it's snakes in a tunnel. And yeah, that's it. I won't take up any more
Well,
time.
what's the name of the book?
Dark Stranger.
Dark Stranger. Where can people find that book?
On Amazon.
On Amazon? Great.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. Okay, did I see, Elizabeth? I think I saw you back there. Yeah. I see.
All right, because I'm the only one in the back. I'm Elizabeth Conti. I have my book, Finding Jane, which you probably see all the time because I advertise all the time. It's Pride and Prejudice meets The Time Traveler's Wife. And I won my fifth and sixth awards last week.
Yay!
This one was for reader views, and I won, which I'm kind of excited for, I won the overall category of third prize, which was bronze. So that was good because it was like over 500 books, and mine was picked. And I was
Wow.
excited.
Congratulations.
And then I won gold, or top prize for romance, which I'm not romance, but that's besides.
Hey, we'll
It's
take
a
first
romantic book.
first
so-
place anytime.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I took put first place with gold, and you can find it on Amazon. I'm trying to introduce literary romance. I'm trying to bring literature back to romance, like Jane Austen and Brontes and things like that. So there you go.
Yeah, great. That's a tall order, Elizabeth. Good job. Okay. Yes, Christina.
Yes, hi. So
We have a guest here. Yeah. Christina Laporte.
I'm a cardiologist, and I have a book called Dissection that starts with people getting a card that says your heart attack will arrive in 1 hour, and ends with World War III.
Oh. Did you say you're a cardiologist?
Yes.
Oh.
Well,
That's what I thought you
I have
said.
a conflict of interest.
So drumming up business, I like it. All right, and people can find that on Amazon and.
Amazon, Dissection.
Okay. Okay, and thank you, Janice, for bringing her.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that Blackstone's releasing the trade paperback of Finding Grace, comes out April 11th.
Oh, wonderful. If you haven't read Finding Grace yet, it's definitely worth it. Definitely worth it. You'll love it.
And
Yeah?
the paperback is much lighter than the hardcover.
Yeah, okay. Easier to travel size. Okay, all right, great. Yes.
My name is Mary McCall. I am new to the group. I mean, I've been a member for a while, but I started coming all the time. And I just signed a contract with Divorce, my first book.
Yay.
And I have no idea when it's going to come out or anything. But it's called The Art of Radical Loving Self-Care.
The Art of Radical?
Radical Loving Self-Care.
Oh, love it. Oh, congratulations. All right, okay, Leonard.
Glenda.
Yeah, I just received the final cover for a book. This is my 7th book. This is co-authored with Rick Bronick.
It's upside down.
Oh, it's upside down. Thank you. It's called Power Tools for Men, a blueprint for healthy masculinity. We focus on 8 power tools to help men look at some healthy behaviors for us to advance ourselves in the 21st century. That's coming out April 28th on Amazon.
Great. That would be a drill, power saw. Yeah, okay. Congratulations. Yeah, Holly?
Okay. That's right. Oh, it's the fourth
Finally,
together.
it's
Right
here.
side down.
Oh, yay. It's done.
This is True Tales from Old California, nonfiction, almost 50 stories that I could find that were the most interesting. My goal is to make people say when they read these stories, well, I heard of that person, or I heard of that thing, but I never knew that. So it's full of all kinds of.
So if you don't know, Colleen's a historian. Now, what is your affiliation with Long Beach?
I worked there for a long time as a research historian on grants.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
Long Beach State, and then Dominguez Hills and Northridge.
Wow, okay, so she's not making this stuff up,
Holly, what's
folks.
the title again?
True Tales from Old California. And yeah, there's stuff in there you might be able to write into. Truly.
I have to tell you, Colleen made me rethink how World War II started. Was it World War I?
World War One.
Yeah. You know, getting mixed
That
up.
was the other book.
Yeah. Catherine?
Oh, hi, I'm Catherine Atkins, and I'm co-president of the California Writers Club of Long Beach. Speaking of Long Beach, and we just changed our venue. We're now meeting at the Los Altos Unified Methodist Church on Willow, and it's a huge room, and it doesn't meet on the same Saturday. It's the second Saturday, not this Saturday. So if you want to all come, look up calwriterslongbeach.org, and hopefully we'll have some of you guys come speak to us in the next few months.
Okay, great, thanks, Catherine. Catherine's also a great writer in her own right. Okay,
Okay.
anybody else before we, Seamus?
I'm Seamus Byrne, and I've got a book coming out on April 22nd through Fireship Press, and it's called Kings Mountain. It tells the story of 2 friends who escaped from a slave colony. One is white, the other is black, and they end up getting swept into the maw of the American Revolution. And they come face to face at the Battle of Kings Mountain, where they have to make a decision whether loyalty to a cause is greater than loyalty to each other, because it will determine who will live and who will die. So it's coming out on April 27th.
Congratulations. Okay, don't sit down, Seamus. So, being our only probably real legitimate Irishman,
Token Irish.
Irish person, yeah, our token.
It was in my bag.
I've asked him to start us off and before we turn over the mic to Antoine, with a little Irish blessing. But before I do that, I just wanted to give him a little commercial. I don't know if anybody's read his first book, Breakout from Sugar Island, which was dedicated to the 60,000 Irish slaves who perished in Barbados during Cromwell's reign of terror. So he sold all those Irish people to the sugar plantations in Barbados as slaves. Cromwell decimated the Irish population pretty much. So that's an interesting book, and also In Search of Bridget Coltrane, which talks a little bit about some of the
It's in the 1940s. around
1940s,
World War II,
right?
and the problems in Ireland with the IRA and the Blue Shirts, which were a fascist group.
Yeah.
And it was about a lost child. And
Yeah, but all great stories, and like any good Irish story, probably has a little bit of literary license and a lot of storytelling. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to you, Seamus, for your.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is supposed to be an Irish blessing. I'm not sure if it's a blessing or not, but here it is. I think you've probably heard it before. May the road rise up to meet you, and may the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine gently on your face, and the rains fall softly on your fields. And may you be in heaven a half an hour before the devil knows you're dead. So, thank you.
Thank you, Seamus. All right, so now we have a real Irish accent, and then we're going to turn it over to you, Antoine, see what you can do with that. So we have, before Antoine speaks, he's kindly agreed to be the master of our Irish literacy test. So we've got 7 questions, which he's going to ask, and we hope he knows the answers. But I'm going to turn the mic over to Antoine. Now, because he's speaking, he wants you all on his side. He can't tell you what the rules are, so I'm going to tell you. This never works, but we're going to try it. Don't call out the answers. Raise your hand, and I'll try it. Please don't hate me if you raise your hand before somebody else and I didn't see it. Okay, that's my disclaimer.
He was up in the Gaspé Peninsula, and he was just sort of
Is your mic working? Can you guys hear him?
Is mic check? Oh, is this isn't? Is this?
You want to use that for the rest?
Oh, but this is just for you.
This is just for the.
So, yeah, he was the last man to be executed in Canada. He found some remnants of a campground that some Americans had left behind, and he collected their stuff and then was found with the stuff, and then the guys were found murdered. So he was executed for their murder. Probably didn't do it. And those guys had come from Pennsylvania, and my dad had been on a ferry where he'd seen these 2 men coming up on a Jeep from Pennsylvania, and he thinks he actually saw the killers. And then he wanted me to write a novel about it and tie it all in somehow to the Molly Malones.
Oh.
So there's your Irish nothingness from me. Okay, folks, 7 questions.
All right.
Winner takes all. I don't think that's how it works. Okay. The Book of Kells. I can't do an Irish accent. The Book of Kells was written in what language?
Gaelic.
Wrong.
Celtic.
Incorrect.
Latin.
Latin it is.
Oh, I'm not sure that's fair. Okay, Shannon. But we'll give you the
Should we do-
bottle of Bushmill.
Should we do an easier one?
Listen, there you go. Shots are on Seamus. All right. Little bottle of Bushmill.
We'll do an easy one here, folks. So this one you're going to want to watch which hand goes up first. What was the first name of the playwright Beckett?
PJ.
It might be Samuel.
It is Samuel. It was Samuel, and it will be Samuel.
All right. Please don't hate me for giving PJ Bushmills.
Watch the cork.
Oh, still watching the...
I feel it. I feel it.
Oh, that whole thing fell off me anyway.
Thank you.
Oh, did I rip it off your?
No. It's just a box. There's a whole thing. There's a coffee up here.
Don't go that way.
Okay, folks. Here's a tricky, difficult one. When is Bloomsday? That is the day on which Ulysses takes place. James Joyce's Ulysses. James Joyce's Ulysses.
Anybody have this up, Glenda?
When is
Bloomsday.
Bloomsday. It's named for Leopold Bloom, who's the protagonist of Ulysses. I'll give you a hint. It is in June. Anyone want to take a swat at it?
Go ahead. Seamus.
Is it June 26th?
Wrong. It's
It sounded you were happy about that.
I don't get to say it that much. No, it was June 16th. But you were very close. You got the right month, so maybe he should get a prize.
He's already opened his first one. So.
Oh, okay. He's already deep into the first one. Which Irish poet was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1923? Nobel Prize winning Irish poet. Who are some old-timey Irish poets?
Yeats. It wasn't Yeats, right?
It was Yeats. Take your own prize.
I'll put that back in the kid. All right.
Okay, this one may be a little easier. Who wrote Angela's Ashes?
Oh, come on. Let's see.
Angela Lansbury? Oh, no, not
Jessica Fletcher? She wouldn't have, though, right?
Wait, PJ, wait, hold on. Okay, Diane.
Was it McCourt?
Yes,
Yeah.
Frank McCourt.
I need to go, baby.
I was too anxious. I wanted to win.
All right. Angela Lansbury, I love it.
Angela Lansbury. Who wrote The Pygmalion that was adapted into My Fair Lady? Probably most famous Irish playwright of old times.
Sure.
Shaw it is. George Bernard Shaw.
George Bernard Shaw.
I don't do that.
The next one's gotta be Oscar.
He doesn't drink, but his wife does.
I don't see any Oscar Wilde questions.
He's my favorite.
What followed the words Paddy Clark in the title of Roddy Doyle's Booker Prize winning novel? Paddy Clark. Paddy Clark.
You stumped everybody.
Oh,
I don't know that
it
one.
was Paddy Clark. Ha ha ha.
God, I can't believe I didn't know that.
I know. I think it's a good title.
No.
Yeah. Okay. How many more do we have here?
You have two more.
Two more. Okay. In which city was Bram Stoker born? Author of Dracula.
Anybody know Bram Stoker?
Yes. It was Dublin. That was a really safe guess. A good guess, a safe guess.
Bram Stoker was Irish.
I didn't know it either. All right. This is the last question. Who wrote The Importance of Being Earnest?
Oscar Wilde?
It was Oscar Wilde. Fabulous. I feel like that was a really good blend of difficult and medium difficult questions.
I know.
Fantastic.
All right, so I'm just going to introduce you. Stay right there.
Okay, I can stay
I'm
here.
going to introduce you real quickly. Let me grab my phone.
Yep.
Okay, so believe it or not, we have probably, drafted into service one of the finest writers in LA, who has a great sense of humor and is very humble. But he is the author of the novels Mouth to Mouth, Panorama City, and The Interloper. Antoine's Mouth to Mouth was featured on Barack Obama's reading list. His other work has appeared in the Paris Review, Story Quarterly, and the Best New American Voices, among other publications. And he is a contributing editor of A Public Space, a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and recipient of a Carol Hope Smith Fiction, Fellowship from the University of Wisconsin, and he lives in LA. So I met Antoine at a local event, and he just floored everybody when they read his book. And I think Catherine said she read his book in one day. So he's going to talk a little bit about his book, his experiences, and the art of revision. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Antoine Wilson.
Hi, thank you. That's delightful. It's always strange to hear the introduction and have to stand there. I feel like, yep, that's me. And some things that I did. So mainly I want to talk about revision. I will say a few words about this book. It's called Mouth to Mouth, and essentially it's a story of a sort of middling success novelist who is stuck on a layover at JFK and headed for Europe, and bumps into someone he knew vaguely in college. And that guy is now Mr. Fancy and invites him to join him in the first class lounge while they're waiting out the flight delay. And once they get up there, he sort of buttonholes our poor narrator and tells him the story sort of his rise post-college from who he was into the fancy art dealer he is today. And that story begins with his saving somebody from drowning on the beach in Santa Monica, who's a very famous art dealer. And so it's the story of someone's rise in that art world. So it takes place in the storytelling takes place mainly in Beverly Hills in the 90s art world, if that interests you guys at all. And it's sort of about his inability to acknowledge the dark side of his ambition, we'll put it that way, or his own privilege. All right, but I really want to talk about revision because when I started as a wannabe writer, I didn't really do revision much, right? I was like most sort of civilians or early writers. I just wanted to like blast the whole thing out in a big burst of inspiration and then be done with it, right? And so like with papers, I would leave it to the 11th hour, bust it out. Who knows what I wrote, you know? Then 2 days later, I got an A. Awesome, that works. So it took me a while when I started writing fiction to start to look at what I'd done, and it's very difficult to figure out what I had accomplished or not accomplished in a story. I didn't know where to start with revision. So as Maddie mentioned, I went to University of Iowa Writers Workshop, which sounds very fancy. For me, it was my first real encounter other than one UCLA extension class and a workshop I took at USC as a sort of special student. I went to UCLA. It was my first encounter with creative writing workshops and all that kind of stuff. So I sort of came, you know, one of those outsider angles. But just before I went to Iowa, I took a correspondence course because I was really hungry for any kind of instruction. I tried to write a novel while traveling around Europe, which is a dumb idea. I didn't know it. Nobody told me. And so I came home and I'm like, I need to learn stuff. So I signed up for this thing called the Humber School for Writers. I don't know if it still exists. It was like in Poets and Writers or something in Toronto. Correspondence course, and they said, in 8 months, you know, you'll finish your manuscript of your book. Yeah, right. And I got teamed up with this writer I'd never heard of, named Peter Carey. Some of you may have heard of Peter Carey. He won the Booker Prize for Oscar and Lucinda. He wrote an incredible novel called The True History of the Kelly Gang. Amazing Australian novelist, now lives in the States. And, you know, I went and looked at his work and I was like, oh my God, this guy's amazing. So sent my first chapter off. It comes back with a bunch of notes on it. And then I'm like, okay, I'll address all of his notes, send it back. Like, now we can move on to the next chapter. But no, the first chapter comes back again with more notes. And we go back and forth. And he says, you know, it's not really realistic to try to work on a whole book manuscript in these 8 months. Let's see how we do with this first chapter. So 8 months later, we went back and forth a lot. And at the very end, I had that first chapter revised. So probably eight drafts. And then the beginning of a second chapter just to see where it might go. And the answer is it went nowhere. The first chapter just became a short story. But this is where I first learned about revision, like real revision. Someone held my hand through the whole process, right? And what did I understand about it? I understood that it was frustrating. I would say, I thought I fixed that, or I thought I addressed that, you know, and he'd be like, no, this more, that more, because it's very subjective when you respond to people, even if you're a creative writing instructor. It's like, make it better, make it better. So I realized the process was iterative, had to go over it multiple times, and it was a dialogue, right? I was going back and forth with him on these queries. So how do you turn that process into something you can do by yourself, right? That's the question, because we don't always have someone who we're paying to be our editor. Sometimes we do, but how do we do it, make our own drafts better? How do we become, how do we get into dialogue with ourselves? And this is one of the secret superpowers of revision. We all know collaboration is a very powerful thing. There are many more things you can accomplish in collaboration with someone else than you can just by yourself, right? Revision is collaboration with your former self, right? With the person who wrote that draft before, and the person who wrote the draft before that. And that can be as, you know, recent as yesterday, or it can be as distant as, you know, dusting something off you haven't looked at for a few years. So when I first talked to my publicist about Mouth to Mouth, right? It had been picked up, I'd done all my edits and stuff, and then it's like, okay, it's coming out in 6 months, we need to get our plan together. And she said, what can you tell me about the book, right? Like the little spiel I gave you just now. And I said, honestly, I used to be the person who wrote this book. Can help, please, you know? And so she wrote a Q&A, and we did, and you know, we came up with this sort of meta narrative that you need to have in order to go on tour and talk about a book. But in that moment, like literally, it just felt like a world away. So if you can find that kind of distance from your own work, and then you can write down those, you can come up with those queries that you need to ask yourself. So how do you do it, right? First, before we talk about how to do it, the benefits. Some of my favorite sort of benefits of revision is one, perfectionism, right? We all deal with perfectionism. A lot of us, it's what keeps us from starting in the first place or returning to something. Especially, I find if I'm working on a draft and I come across some like awesome moment and I stop there, it's very hard for me to come back. I get frustrated because I'm like, I actually moved myself a little bit here. I want to keep reading. And why the hell does it have to be me that has to keep making it up, you know? But anyway, the perfectionism thing. So this process, it counters that kind of perfectionism because, and it's a bit of a paradox, right? Because the more you revise, the sort of more perfectionist you can be in a positive way. But it allows you to write a draft that you know is not the final draft and you know is only going to be looked at by yourself. So you don't have to be perfect, right? You don't want to like, you know, close your eyes and let go of the steering wheel, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, the paradox is that you have to like write it as if it's going directly into the New Yorker tomorrow. Like you have to have that kind of pressure and concentration, but then also know in the back of your mind that no one else has to see what a bad writer you are, okay? Because the truth is like we're bad writers when we first lay things down. I mean, even the people who can write the most sort of facile first draft, and I write decently facile first drafts, it's just not as good as it should be. And that's right. That's how it is. Second thing, it makes your writing more fun. You know that pleasure of discovery when you're working and you're like, I didn't think of that. Oh, this character surprised me. All that kind of stuff. It's redoubled in revision. Because you go back and you're like, here's what I'm working with. Here's what I've laid down. And oh, what if? The what ifs pop up and they pop up more clearly and in ways that you can sort of get feedback that it's making it better. And that's the third thing, it makes your work better. No doubt about it. I don't think I've ever seen a revision from a student that made a story worse. I see your hands up.
Are you saying that the novel you were writing was about religion, or you're talking about how your own religion?
Revision. Sorry.
I hear that. I'm sorry, but revision is the whole thing.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry.
No. Okay. So Christ. Yeah, sorry about that. He says the meek shall inherit the earth. The earth? Who wants to inherit the earth? What about the kingdom of heaven? It makes no sense. Sorry. Okay, back to revision and how it's done. So, to me, like, don't believe anything I say about my book or about revision because it's all made up, right? However, I'm going to try to share with you as best I can some things that I've noticed and isolated along the way from my own process. And one is that I sort of separate out like the squishy, intuitive self, right? The sort of, the part that gets inspired, the part that doesn't know where the story came from, right? From the sort of logical, intellectual, editorial self. The kind that, can't stand to see the same word repeated, 12 lines apart. The kind that wants structure that's tight. So there are these two halves, the sort of Dionysian, crazy party type, and the Apollonian, right? I think Nietzsche did something with these two. The first you have to protect, and the second you have to develop. So let's talk about the first one, protecting that intuitive, squishy thing. This is where, how many of you have read Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, or you're familiar with it? So she's famous for coming up with the idea of the shitty first draft in that book, right? And it's all about just like getting something down on paper. This is countering that kind of perfectionism. Laying something down on paper so that you have something to work with. And she uses that word shitty to make sure you understand that you're just going to get it out. Don't have high hopes for it. So I love that idea. And it's hard to do. The better you are at writing and the better stuff you read, the harder it is to write that shitty first draft. Because again, you look at it and you go, God, I'm a terrible writer. But you have to sort of step away from that, knowing that it's protected under this sort of cone of silence. You are the only person who sees it. And you have to be really, really sort of strict with yourself, because some of you who are maybe extroverted, like myself, you want to share it with somebody immediately. You know, oh man, here's what I came up with today, or this is great. Resist the urge to share it. That sort of dispels the energy a lot of the time, but also it's not ready to be exposed to the light. It's got to stay in that sacred little place that you have. So I got some quotes from writers better than myself. William Faulkner, you may have heard of him. Get it down, take chances. It may be bad, but it's the only way you can do anything really good. And for those of you who love nonfiction, John McPhee says, blurt out, heave out, babble out something, anything as a first draft. Until it exists, writing has not really begun. That's true, right? You're sitting there, there's nothing on the page that it's not happening. So you have to create the space where you can suck, or soar, or both, right? And Barbara Kingsolver, another quote, I love quotes, she says, close the door. Write with no one looking over your shoulder. Don't try to figure out what other people want to hear from you. Figure out what you have to say. It's the one and only thing you have to offer, right? Don't try to be anybody else. And this should be a space that is protected enough that you could write, I want to kill my mother, or whatever. Something absolutely awful, but no one's going to find it, right? Password protected, or just keep your journal tucked away or something like that. You have to be free to write everything. Now, the second half, developing the Apollonian editorial muscle part. How to become your own sort of best editor. Well, the reading, I think a lot of us become writers because we've had great reading experiences, and we want to do to other people's heads and hearts what have been done to ours from great books. And so we have these wonderful reading experiences. And then we sit down and we try to write, and in part, we're dealing with our own creative output, whatever, but we also want to create that reading experience for someone else. This can be a tricky thing because our memory of what it was like to read a book is very different from what it means, what it is to build a book out of words and sentences that have to make sense on a basic level versus, the high-flowing feelings and hormones and things that happened when we read some 600-page doorstopper. But the funny thing is you can never be your own naive reader. Unless we had a eternal sunshine of the spotless mind type situation where you could wipe your memory, or maybe, God forbid, a brain injury, you can't read your own book as a reader. Everybody, anybody who's put material out there and had people respond to it positively, I love that story. It moved me. That's great. I think that's awesome that you're having that experience that I cannot have. I'm the one person who can't read my own book like that. So how do you get distance from your own work? Bernard Malamud, another quote coming, he says, I do many more than I call 3 drafts of a novel. Usually the last of the first puts it in place. The second focuses, develops, subtilizes. By the third, most of the dross is gone. I work with language. I love the flowers of afterthought. Yeah, that's good. I always wondered, did he revise that line, right? But I also he says, the last of the first. Right in there, that's all the shitty first drafts, right? Coming up until he's finally got what he's calling a first draft. It's the last of the first drafts before you start to move into sort of drafts that you might even count as drafts. So it's a simple 3-step process. All you have to do is put it in place, focus it and subtleize it or something, and then discard the dross. Thank you very much. Yeah, right, sorry. Maybe we could say, like, divide it into explore it, shape it, and polish it. Those are sort of maybe 3 big ways to divide it. But how do you get the distance to do that? And this is where I go back into my journey. I had done this Peter Carey thing. I'm like, I know I can revise somehow. And it was in graduate school that I started to figure out how to do it for myself. Because what I figured out, and this surprised me very much, and it's true for graduate school or personal writing circle, as long as your people are real with feedback and you're real with giving them feedback, or an extension workshop. I learned more from critiquing other people's stories than I did from anything they had to say about my stories. I did not think that was the case, even while it was happening, until at some point I realized, oh, okay, now I know how to critique these stories. And I'm using, like, little editor brain is getting a workout. And then when I would turn to my stuff, all of a sudden I could see more clearly. So it's really about developing those editorial muscles by taking someone else's work very seriously and trying to figure out how to make it work better, breaking it down, the sort of craft nuts and bolts, and then you'll return to your work and you'll find it is easier to get that distance and to see. Obviously there are other strategies, right, that I also use. Put it away for 3 days. Work on something else, put it away for 3 months. Show it to somebody else, publish it. There's nothing like publishing something to suddenly see all of the faults in it. Yeah, change the medium. If you have a computer and your draft is in your computer, you can have your computer read it to you, which is interesting and strange. All different kinds of approaches, any of which you can find elsewhere in any manual on revision. So to recap that part, all you have to do is become a fearless writer with an unerringly keen eye for your own work. Right. Oh, sorry, not leaving just yet. So while I was, Mouth to Mouth took forever to write. It's a very short book, but it took forever to write. And in part, it was because I was writing it alongside another book, which let's just call it The Island. And I would hit a roadblock on that book and tell my wife, I'm done. Never going back to it. It just simply doesn't work. I'm going to go work on the Rescuer story, Mouth to Mouth. Then I would hit a wall on Mouth to Mouth, and I'd say, I'm done. Never going to work on it again. I'm going to go back to that Montreal Island story. And I went back and forth like that for years until, while working on the Island story, something clicked, and I realized what Mouth to Mouth needed was the narrator, schlubby writer character that I mentioned. It needed for this story to take place in this airport lounge. The early draft, which was 1.5 times what this book was the Rescuer character, Jeff, directly speaking to the reader. It was a first-person account, and it never really got anywhere. I mean, it's 1.5 times longer than the entire book, and it never kind of found what it was. So it was a shift in point of view, really, and structure that helped me understand what I had been making the whole time and hadn't realized, that focused it. Meanwhile, the Island book. It's the first time in my life that I had the experience where I have a work that refuses to bend to any of my editorial desires. It's not nonfiction. It does have some elements, locations from my life and stuff, my childhood, but it refuses to turn into a piece of fiction that I can edit, frustratingly. So it's in a drawer. I don't know if it'll ever become anything. So yeah, become a fearless writer with an unerringly keen eye for your work, right? It's impossible, sometimes. So here's a longer quote from a Nobel Prize winning writer, a master of the short story. Just to remind you how it is for the highest echelon of writer that I can imagine. I could be writing away one day and I think I've done very well. I've done more pages than I usually do. Then I get up the next morning and realize I don't want to work on it anymore. When I have a terrible reluctance to go near it, when I would have to push myself to continue, I generally know that something is badly wrong. Often, in about 3/4 of what I do, I reach a point somewhere, fairly early on, when I think I'm going to abandon this story. I get myself through a day or two of bad depression, grouching around, and I think of something else I can write. It's sort of like a love affair. You're getting out all the disappointment and misery by going out with some new man you really don't like at all, but you haven't noticed that yet. Then I'll suddenly come up with something about the story I abandoned. I'll see how to do it. But that only seems to happen after I've said, no, this isn't going to work, forget it. You can imagine how delighted I was to come across this passage after my experiences with this island story. Anyone want to guess who that is? Yes?
Christie?
Nope. Nobel Prize winning Canadian short story writer Alice Munro. Yeah.
Oh my.
Right? I mean, she's a master. Pick up any of her stories. It's just pure confidence. The structure of those stories are unbelievable. But yeah, so she's groping around in the dark with the rest of us, you know? Nuts and bolts, revision process. I would recommend a book called Refuse to be Done by Matt Bell. It just came out maybe last year. Matt is a friend of mine, and I was super excited I got an early copy of this book, and he's just really great at holding your hand through stages of revision of a long manuscript. And it's, you know, it's nothing kind of mind-blowing, but it's always good to have that stuff laid out. And he's got some really great ideas in there. It's very practical. But what I can do is share with you, sort of as we wrap up here, a few observations from my own process that you might not find in a book like that. I think it was Philip Roth. Yes, Joyce Carol Oates, I think, in the Paris Review interview, talked about Philip Roth talking about writers when they ask other writers about their process, right? And what writers really want to know, he said, about their process, you know, about other people's process is, are they as crazy as I am? I used to read that and think, no, actually I want to hear about the process because I want new things to try, you know? I don't wonder that. I assume that everybody's got some things going on that I haven't yet learned as a young writer that I want to learn. And so I want to hear about process. Now, I agree with Philip Roth because my process is completely crazy. I don't know how to explain it to anyone, and I know my friends' processes are crazy too, or so it feels. But I have some observations. So usually I start with whatever I start with, right? A notion, an idea, a character, a theme, a place, wherever any of us start. And the part that, well, I'm in that shitty first draft mode, the part that I'm first sort of exploring and sort of, like I call it circling the dog bed, right? Starting the pre-writing thing where I haven't sat down yet, you know? Point of view. That's the one that I have to figure out first. Who's telling the story? Where are they coming from? Why are they telling the story? Even in close third person, why does this story belong to this person's consciousness? And it's a question I ask myself pretty much the entire time, even once I've settled on one sort of intuitively. And as I said, in Mouth to Mouth, it turned out I needed to rethink the whole novel in terms of what the point of view was. So that's probably the hardest part for me in the beginning. Is settling. It's almost like figuring out which direction to start walking. The other thing is, as I said, when we're looking at our own manuscripts and we realize what bad writers we are in that shitty first draft mode, it's even worse. It gets worse, folks. It doesn't get better. Try publishing a book, having a bunch of people say nice things about it, start to believe, you know, start to smoke your own supply, so to speak, and then you sit down to write, and ooh, this is not, somehow what I'm writing is not as good as that thing I spent 7 years polishing. These sentences coming out are halting, and they don't know exactly, they're uncertain about what they want to say, and the diction is kind of blah, and you know. So that's one of the hard parts. That's sort of getting over the perfectionism part. looking at my own bad sentences. So, however, I'm wise enough to know that my sort of conceptual brain, my wife is a television writer, so when she comes up with a story, she has an area first, she has the characters, she breaks it into sort of a general, kind of like a preface, like a little summary of what the story is going to be. Then it becomes an outline, then it becomes a script. And then it gets shot, hopefully, and becomes a TV show. But what she does with each sort of step is she breathes more life into these things. And it's amazing to watch it happen. Go from an outline to a script, and suddenly these characters just become three-dimensional, all this stuff. And it astonishes me because I work the other way, right? I start digging into my elbows with life and then try to find a shape. And I think that, it depends. Some people are like that. Some people are outliners, and I'm not. So my conceptual brain, if I had to come up with a story and write that preface, it kind of sucks. It just bends way toward cliche and things that everyone's seen before and that kind of thing. I'm not like John Irving. He loves to outline his novels. So I'm not the John Irving type. I've got to grope my way there. Writing Panorama City, my previous novel, took about 4 years, and it started with, I had an idea for a character and something that was happening. This sort of man-boy, 27-year-old, naive, illiterate, small town, Madera, Central California, burying his father in the backyard. It was an image that came to me from a dream. I know. And I wrote it in third person first for a page. Nah, wasn't good. First person, let's let him speak for himself and see what happens. 15 pages, ran out of steam. Okay, here's a different angle, and here's why he might be telling his story. 30 pages, started to get sort of frothy. That's where you got more events happening, kind of things keep happening, but the underlying meaning of them doesn't kind of adhere in the same way, and so you end up with sort of just wild actions. Okay, we'll go back in 60 pages on the next one, and then 120 pages or something on the next one, and then I was finally off to the races. It's a terrible style of process to start over and over like that. However, it had some advantages. One of which was that the material of the book, the language in which this character, Oppen Porter, spoke, which was very distinctive, and he would tend to absorb other people's phrases and repeat them verbatim. So there's a lot of really fun language in that book. With each subsequent draft, that language is sort of getting more and more uploaded into my head, so that by the time I was writing that final first draft, or whatever Malamud calls it, the last of the first, the sentences had that sort of feeling that they were spontaneous and at hand, because it had all been just churned through here so much that it allowed me to write with that kind of energy, especially in first person, as I was moving through the book. The key to that was no cutting and pasting. Right? So I try to stick with this in revision, no cutting and pasting. The reason is, if you take something out of context and then pop it back in, especially something you love, sometimes it can be like, it turns out to be one of those darlings you have to kill, and you pop it into a new context, it sticks out. So if you rewrite it from memory, or sometimes even if you have it next to you, you can sometimes fold it into the context of the current draft that you're working on. So that's what I would end up doing, and it was almost like a natural selection thing. The things that survived into the next draft, from my memory mainly, were the things that stayed in, and they were theoretically the best things. So, no cutting and pasting. May or may not be useful to you. What is very practical and may be very useful to you was, as I said, I'm not an outliner, but I always make an outline after that first draft is done, right? I reverse engineer an outline. it is an incredible way to shift from that mushy brain to the editorial brain, and it gives you like mega power-ups, you know, on how you can see your own work. I use Scrivener, which I don't know, you guys, yes? I see some Scrivener fans. Yeah, so Scrivener is great. You can import the document and you can break it up into little Scrivener pieces, and then you can have comments on it, and like what status of revision it's in, whether you need to, you know, blow more detail into it or clean it up or whatever. But it also gives you that reverse engineered outline, so you can see your entire book on a matter of pages, and you can see sort of where, if somebody who read it said, yeah, it kind of went flat here, you know, you can go to that section and see it from that bird's eye view. It's incredibly powerful. And then something that happens in that process too is I like to figure out what is the sort of unit of the storytelling. It's very abstract, but it's abstract enough that I don't entirely know what I'm talking about, except it happens at that process in every book. For Panorama City, it was the paragraph. For Mouth to Mouth, it was the chapter. For some other things, it might be scene versus summary. But once you have that bird's eye view, and you've sort of created what the unit is that your storytelling moves along, however you want to define it, you can look at rhythm, right? I think the sort of fundamental rhythm of most fiction is scene and summary, oscillating back and forth between scene and summary, doing everything in summary to set something up and then deploying a scene, maybe. So again, that reverse engineered outline is very useful for looking at rhythm. Right now, the thing I'm working on, I'm in that, under that cone of silence, I'm in the shitty first draft. Because of children and a puppy and other things, I'm working in Google Docs for the first time, and I need to be able to go to my Google Doc, open it. If I've got a half an hour, I can work, put it back away, and it just saves automatically. It's on my phone, it's on my laptop, it's wherever I am. And then this is the cockamamie scheme, the insane strategy that I will share with you. The first 25,000 words of the new thing, one sentence. Now, right, would I subject a reader to that? I don't know. I mean, I think I would if I thought it was necessary, but I don't think it's necessary. It's necessary for me to be able to open my Google Doc and see a comma instead of a period, right? Then I'm just like, oh, I'll just keep adding. So, and then I actually finished the sentence, and now I got another 10,000 word sentence. But the point is, what's the rhythm of that? Who knows? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a mess. It's moving forward, like I have a big storyline that's moving forward, but it's a mess. But I feel okay because I know at some point I'm going to, chop it up and get Apollonian on it and try to make it friendlier to a reader. How are we doing on time here? It's 11 now. Can I make a few more points?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll make my points sort of quickly. The problem with your ending is the beginning. Right? Mic drop. I don't want to drop the mic. I want to break it. But that's super not a mic drop thing to do. Mic, sit down. The problem with the ending is the beginning. That's not always true, but very, very often true. Why? It's sort of simple. By the time you're writing your ending, you know your book or your story. When you wrote that beginning, who knows? You didn't know where you were going exactly. You didn't know what it was going to turn into. You had a burst of inspiration, and you might feel real connection to that beginning because it's what got you going. But 99% of the time, you got to go back to the beginning and be like, okay, now I know what I am setting up. Mouth to Mouth has an ending that hinges on the last sentence. Talk about a mic drop. I did not know that was going to be the ending. I thought the previous chapter was the ending. And I literally finished writing the previous chapter, sat down and was like, wow, that's it. I'm at the end of the manuscript. Great. I think this is something interesting. We'll see, and send it to my friends, whatever. And then I was like, what if, and I started typing the next chapter. And I wrote the entire next chapter. Like that. Like, it just came out with this really wonderfully phrased last sentence. And then I sat back and I was like, well, can I do that? I mean, you know, I don't know if I can do that. Just drop the mic on that last sentence. And I thought, well, actually, that's something I'd like to read. So let's, you know, look at that. But then what ended up happening was, is the last line that those of you who haven't read it sort of has the effect of you get to the end of the book and you read the last line and then you turn around and look back to where you came from. And all the shadows look different from this side, right? That kind of thing. So what do I have to do? I have to go back and make all the shadows look different. I have to go back and revise to make that mic drop earned so that I don't need an epilogue. I don't need a coda. I got to build these things into it. So the problem with the ending was what came before. Language. I think when we talk about revision, a lot of us just think of fixing up the language. I use a thesaurus, but really what I do is I use the Google and I write, you know, some word and then synonym and it shoots a bunch of things at me. Do I use it to deploy 25-cent words that I don't understand or know? I do not. What I use it for is to get those words that are on the tip of my tongue. You know what I mean? Sometimes those of us who are superannuated might have experienced, as we get older, the loss of some of our words. They're somewhere in there. I don't think it's because our brains are bad, by the way. I think it's because we know more words. And so we know there's something better out there. Our listening vocabulary, especially like among writers, let's say it's 50,000 words, okay? Any number of 50,000 words can be said to you and you know what they mean. What is your speaking vocabulary? 5 to 10,000. So there's a huge gap between what you can understand and what you use in your day-to-day. In that gap are a lot of those words that you might find in revision from the thesaurus. It's not cheating, you know, to find those correct words, the words that really nail down what you're trying to say. Also in language, something that happens, I've seen it in student work, and then I do it myself. I call it the multiple choice detail. You're describing something, and it's, you know, her hair was flowing, exquisite, filled with static, whatever, you know. But there's like, you know, you'll have 3 details sometimes. And sure, sometimes if you want to be a maximalist, okay. But a lot of the time, that's you groping your way toward the right detail. So when you go back into your manuscript, you'll see sort of these repetitions and all that kind of stuff, and you can get more concise. You can choose the right one. And in general, there's an editor named Saul Stein who wrote a book on editing novels. He has this great phrase: when revising, substitute precise words and phrases for top-of-the-head words that flow into first drafts. So he's literally saying, use that 50,000 word bank and get in there and substitute for those 5,000 to 10,000 words. You know, that first thought theater stuff that was good enough to keep you going, sort of hitting the target, not quite. So move from vagueness to specificity in the language. Fairly simple. And then there's this sort of, I'm going to throw it on the side, this paradox of what is universal and what appeals universally. Those of you who are familiar with it, great. Those of you who are not, might be interesting. If you want to make the audience for your book as universal as possible, you want it to appeal to everyone, there might be a temptation to go vague rather than specific, right? Thinking that the individual odd, quirky, cultural detail might alienate people who are not from whatever the culture is, or so on. In fact, the opposite is true. Because what happens if you write vaguely is you just have a reader who's not engaged, because it's not creating enough experience. It's not creating that density of experience. However, if you write very specifically true to the world that you're creating, it ends up creating a universe that anyone can recognize, right? We love Midnight's Children. We love Angela's Ashes. We love any number of books that have nothing to do with perhaps our own personal experience. But because they're richly detailed, we recognize in them our planet, right? What it is to be in a human body. And then we're delighted by the other aspects of them that are foreign to us. So that's what I call the paradox of universality. So move from vagueness to specificity, move from a superfluity to concision, right? Pick that one detail. Compress those scenes that are laggy. Don't need to do a bunch of introductions. Don't need to do a bunch of wrapping up. You just, take that first draft and find those moments, that dialogue that really hits the nail on the head, and squeeze that. And then the other one, the biggest one of these move things, is move from information to experience. First draft, often a lot of information, because we're telling ourselves the story. I think it's Terry Pratchett who says that's what the first draft is for. It's to tell ourselves the story. So there's a lot of information, and yet we're not necessarily thinking of the experience that we're creating for the reader. And this idea of moving from information to experience in revision is built into so many things you hear in creative writing. Use all 5 senses, right? Show, don't tell, right? I think show, don't tell is an interesting one, and I think it gets misunderstood a lot, because telling interestingly is better than showing poorly, right? If you show everything, that's abject naturalism. There's no reason why, it's bring went the alarm clock is how those stories begin often, because people don't know when to start. They just move forward in time, showing everything. If you can tell in a way that creates experience, thumbs up. If you show in a way that feels like information, thumbs down, right?
Wait, say that again.
Oh, I was going to say, if you can tell in a way that creates an experience for the reader, thumbs up. But if you show in a way that just creates information for the reader, thumbs down. It's pretty definitive.
Do you have any examples of that?
Well, I think you can open just about any really great novel and find that telling that creates experience. Somebody who's not necessarily describing a moment in time, but might be describing a state of mind or something. And then in terms of showing and it being information, static instead of experience, perhaps Tom Clancy's novels, where he really gets into the nitty-gritty of the details of modern weaponry, for instance, or ships or something like that. People enjoy it, that's great, but it's not creating that sort of lived experience. Instead, you're getting information. I hope those are, I don't have an exact example off the top of my head of the telling in an interesting way. So two more things. The number one piece of advice when revising, follow the energy. Alice Munro talked about it, right? Earlier, where she was, follow the energy, yes. She was talking about when she feels bogged down, when she feels uninspired, when she feels something isn't working, she knows. Don't keep banging your head against that wall. We all know if we're just tired, right? But if you're coming back to your manuscript and it feels like a chore, it's probably going to feel like a chore to the reader too. Maybe there's a way to make it feel like less of a chore, but follow the energy. Follow your own curiosity. You can't go wrong with following the energy, I think. And finally, something I came up with while writing Panorama City. I was walking home after a day, terrible day writing. I used to work in like a shared office that was a mile from my house. And it was one of those days where I'm walking home and I'm like, why didn't I go surfing instead, right? Because I sat in an office for hours and what I came up with just sucked. And I realized I spent a lot of time comparing my own work to the work of my heroes. to the work of the writers that I admire, to Alice Munro, for example, or anyone whose work I was engaged with at the same time, because I'm always reading, right? And I realized, what am I comparing myself to? I'm comparing that shitty first draft of mine to something that's been gone over who knows how many times it's been revised, plus an editor, plus it's published, all the way down the line. So it makes no sense to compare my shitty first draft to this brilliant work that I'm reading. And how I conceptualize that is I compare my work not to the hero, but to the zero.
That was a mic drop moment.
Yeah, how did that happen? So what does that mean? Don't compare yourself to the writer you admire most. Don't compare your work to the hero. Compare it to the zero that was this, the blank page. There was nothing there this morning. And even if you think it sucks, there's something there now that would never have existed if you hadn't written it. Right? It's finishing the hat. You made something. So that's what I have to say in those low moments. Think of the zero, the blank page that you've created something on, not the hero, not what it could possibly be, but what it is right now. That's all I have to say. And I do have to say one little addendum. You might have noticed that I say a lot and I did that on purpose. I don't normally I have no little tics in my speech at all. I threw in a lot of uhs out of tribute to the name of your group, SCWA. So that's why that happened. The final thank you for listening to me. I hope that it was useful.
We have just a couple minutes for questions, not too many, unfortunately. But I think, Elizabeth, your hand went up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So you talked about this revision. Okay, so when do you say the end, where you give it to your editor? Because that's a big process for, like, let's say 3 drafts. I think I'm on draft 10.
Yeah.
When is it ready for the editor?
So the question is, when is it ready for the editor? When do you know you're finished with, you've pushed it as far along by yourself as you can? Well, for me, there are a number of stages of people I show it to before the editor. So it's kind of a question I can't answer definitively, other than I feel like I've done as much work as I can on it. And then I have one friend who's also a novelist who I show it to. Then he gives me comments, and usually those comments, as he gives them to me, I'm like, of course, I knew that, but I didn't know that. I knew that, but I hadn't been able to admit it to myself, kind of thing. I do a revision based on his critique, then I show it to my agent. Then she usually gives it a pretty good critique, and she's very much aware of the marketplace and all that kind of stuff. And then, eventually it goes to my editor. So for me, it's usually 3 other people that see it before, as it moves through that pipeline.
So in the final stage for all us writers here, how many times do you think you're writing on your manuscript? Like, I go through 6 versions, 10 versions?
How many actual versions or drafts do I go through? Grace Paley said, I don't like to count drafts. I never understand what people mean when they say they've done 20 drafts or something. Does that mean they've typed it 20 times or what? I'm always changing things as I go. It's always substantially different by the time I've finished. I do it till it's done. I know a story is done when I don't have anything else to say. I like that quote because it's very hard for me to answer that question. I don't know. It's a lot. But sometimes it's like so fine-grained that I wouldn't count it as a whole new draft. Sometimes it's very much like new file, draft 2.0. So hard question to answer. I know, and I know with Peter Carey, I did 8 drafts of that short story. That seemed pretty good. Seemed like enough.
Could Can you comment on AI using ChatGPT? I mean, I've come to use it as my personal research assistant.
Can I comment on using AI and ChatGPT? And you're using it as your personal research assistant. It's great for that. It's great as a sort of Google substitute. Although it can be wrong, you have to double check things. I asked it to write a commencement speech for me for the UCLA English department, and it gave me this quote about, lilies that fester smell far worse than weeds, said George Herbert. It's Shakespeare. So that would be embarrassing if I used that in front of the English department commencement at UCLA. Ted Chiang wrote an article in the New Yorker a few weeks ago about ChatGPT, and he suggested that we can look at it as a JPEG of the internet, a lossy copy of the internet. So it's like a paraphrase of the internet. What is interesting, and one of the things that makes people excited about it is, let's say you're teaching a freshman and you send them off to write an essay, and they come back with something they copied out of the encyclopedia, Wikipedia. But let's say they come back with something that they've rephrased, having looked at several different sources. Great, A-, whatever. It looks like intelligence. So Google looks like a machine just picking text off the internet. But ChatGPT, because it massages and incorporates the text, looks to us to be smarter. And so it has that feeling of intelligence. And maybe it does have some form as a result of intelligence, being able to paraphrase or consolidate. But really, it's just another form of search, a lossy copy. But I do find it interesting. It also writes in French or other languages, which is really fun. It's good if you want to practice foreign language. Ask it to write you a short story in that language, featuring members of your family, and that generates interest for yourself. If you're bored.
Colleen, did you have your hand? Oh, I was trying to remember the exact quote from Truman Capote that I had read years ago, and it went something like, your book manuscripts are never finished until the day you put them in the mailbox to your editor.
Ah, yes.
You could just keep rewriting. At
Yes.
some point you have to stop and just go with it.
Yes. So she was saying that Truman Capote said that your manuscript is never finished until it's in the mailbox. I would say even beyond that, until it's in print in this form, the paperback. I've seen many writers though read from their books, at bookstores with a pen in hand. Have you guys ever seen this? And in fact, I have a copy. I didn't change it for the paperback, but I have a copy of my reading copy of Mouth to Mouth that has rewrites in it for when I read aloud. And it's sort of like, I think there's a word where I say something about something is seen, and then I talk about the whole scene. And I'm like, ugh, I can't do that, not out loud. So it becomes scenario. Yeah, it never stops until you're forced to stop. And in fact, people who publish in literary journals often look at that as one step in the process of getting themselves to the final published short story collection. Stuart Dybek, wonderful short story writer, does that for one.
That's great. Okay, anybody else? One more. Okay, Seamus.
I'm starting a new novel. I have a notion. I'm not sure where it's going at all. But I came up with a character that I said I'm going to follow this impulse. I like this guy. And I had projected ahead maybe 2 or 3 chapters where I think this was going to end up. But as I started to write more, then I changed that direction.
Yeah.
Which is the more valid impulse, the first one or the second one, or is it impossible to tell?
It's impossible to tell. So Seamus's question was, he's working on a new project. He's got a character he likes a lot. He's starting to write, and he had an idea in this sort of 2nd or 3rd chapter something was going to happen. Now he's started writing, and it seems like maybe the impulse is that something else should happen. It's impossible to tell. However, if you were me or I were you, I would follow that second impulse. And the reason is for me that my conceptual brain, I know, is not as good at coming up with interesting stuff as my subconscious, as my sort of creative mushy part. And the way I access the creative mushy part is by writing. That's when I discover things that I find interesting and energetic. And I write often like what you're describing. I have an idea of what's coming up at some point, and it's going to be a turn one way or the other. And I keep it open enough so that when I get there, usually something maybe unexpected or more charged happens, and then I go from there to the next sort of signpost. But follow the energy.
So you're self-guessing. You're second-guessing yourself, and that's okay.
Oh, it's 100% okay to change course and second-guess yourself. I think it's necessary to remain open to what's to come, especially in the early stages. And it just reminded me of one final thing about Peter Carey, who taught me that revision process. Years later, 20 years later, I heard from a friend who had studied with him that Peter Carey's own process of revision, and this is a handy tip, is to have his manuscript open, like his draft open on one side, and when he's rereading a draft, first draft or whatever, in another window, he has all his queries. The same type of questions he was asking me, he literally types them out. What kind of soil was it? What was the fence made of? What did it smell like? Whatever. And why is this character doing this? All these kinds of things. So he acts as his own editor in two separate windows when he's editing an early draft. So that's a handy tip.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank Antoine for sharing his thoughts. I hope you all agree that this was a masterclass in revision. I've heard things today, and I've studied writing for a long time, that I have not heard anywhere else before, put in such a usable, tactical format. So I want to thank you again. We are so very lucky to have had you. This is just a little something from us to you.
Thank you.
For being here. And if you haven't read Mouth to Mouth, read Mouth to Mouth. It is an experience. It's not structured probably like anything that you've ever read. It keeps you thinking. It's lyrical. The dialogue is amazing. The way that you're second guessing yourself and wondering where, trying to get your own guidepost, it keeps changing. So it will keep you engaged right to the end, to the last page in that wonderful sentence. Yeah, Diana.
Do you have books here?
Yeah, well, we do. Well, thank you for asking. Hold on, the mic just went out.
She's a plant.
I just happen to have another one here. We do happen to have books here. I read the hard copy version, but I imagine the tradeback is the same, similar.
It has a neat Q&A at the end, which I'm actually proud of.
Okay. All right. Good. Good. So if that doesn't entice you to buy a book, I don't forget everything I said. It has a Q&A at the end. Because we encourage you all to support our speakers and really listen to what they're saying and see their execution, we are discounting his book. We paid full price, but we are discounting his books. They're $10 today.
Nice.
So we've got a limited number of those books, but they are available in any independent bookstore, any, what do you call it? Legacy, not independent, just those regular bookstores, but they're still bookstores, libraries. So please, if you can't buy the book and you read it online, please leave a review, because reviews are valuable to authors as well as support. So please do that, right?
Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you again to Antoine. I want to thank everybody for being here. I encourage you all to follow us on Facebook and on our YouTube channel, SCWA Writers Online. We have not only videos of our past speakers, and we've had amazing speakers, maybe not as amazing as you, Antoine. I have to say, you are up there in the top, I don't want to make anybody mad.
20.
Yeah, I'll say 3. But you'll see those, you'll see the Wednesday Hump Day interviews that we do every Wednesday morning. They're also on SCWA Writers Online, so we encourage you to follow us there. And okay, I want to thank everybody for being here, our board members, people who made this happen, Diana, Bruce, where's Jim? Jim? Yeah, of course, Robert Rollins, our fabulous filmmaker, who's here videoing this for, I guess, posterity and in perpetuity. See, I'm reaching for those words, listening to you. All right, and we have lunch outside, so we're going to be setting up to sell Antoine's books. He's going to be signing, and we'll have lunch, and then we will see you all next month, April 15th. Dun, 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 dun. And we have a wonderful writer, Lisa Coppola, who writes short stories, and amazing writer as well. So we will see you on the 15th and see you outside. Thank you very much.